when the world's too dark of a place to be, and you need an escape from reality. Open up those pages, it's sci-fi or fantasy, whatever genre you please. And join a book club, 'cause you won't read it on your own. Join a book club, so you'll be held accountable. It's just a means to an end, but you're doing it with your friends, so join the book club by DLC.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of the DLC Book Club, your weekly check-in about reading / dance break. I'm Jeff Kanata. I'm joined by Lana Bashinsky. Good morning, Lana.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Yes, we normally record on Thursdays, and we tried to record yesterday morning, and everything crashed and broke, and just it was a disaster. But
yeah,
things are going much better this morning.
Much like reading this show, flexible.
I am so excited to talk to you, though, because we have arrived at the end of the first book of the second novel in the Malazan Books of the Fallen. We are in Deadhouse Gates, which is the second novel, and we are in the first book, Roraku, and we are at chapters 4 and 5. And already, that's crazy. We got revelations, we got big action, we got thrills and chills and drama, we got sadness, we got everything in these 2 chapters. I'm so excited to talk about it. But we won't go into spoilers quite yet. No, we always start with our non-spoiler section. And you can always submit ideas for what we should talk about in our non-spoiler section in our Discord, which is 5x5 DLC on Discord. And then there is a book club thread. We have The Gardens of the Moon, which was the first novel of the Malazan Books of the Fallen. We did 4 episodes on that. And you can catch up with that and talk about it in the Discord there. And then we have the Deadhouse Gates thread. So that's where we are. But Lana, I know that you had a topic you wanted to bring up for our non-spoiler section.
I did have a topic. I ran into something that this last week that has happened to me a couple times before. And I think it's very fascinating because I'm so not like that. I was talking to people about my vacation and all the books I read, and I primarily read not like fictional books, hanging out, fantasy worlds, whatever, Malazan type. But I'll read whatever, like something catches my interest. I also, over the break for my workbook club, read How to Win Friends and Influence People. And somebody brought up, hey, I never read anything that is not bettering me, like it's like a self-help book. They said I never read fiction. It's nonfiction. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm becoming a better person when I'm reading. And so my question for you is, have you engaged in this sort of, I don't know if it's all considered the self-help genre, but is that something that has ever caught your interest when reading, or something? What's your take on the self-help
really interesting
versus hardline fiction versus nonfiction stance?
Did you dig in at all with that person and ask them if they've always been like that, or if that's a recent phenomenon? Because I feel like, in my experience, people sort of, as they're getting older, kind of sometimes gravitate toward that. Like, I need to be reading about how to make my life better in some fashion.
It was right before a meeting, so I was just kind of like, oh, I wanted to be like, are you okay?
Yeah.
So no, I didn't dive any further into it.
My wife is very much in that place now. I mean, I think she used to read fiction much more, but now that she's a mom, and last night, don't tell her I told you this story, but last night I went up to bed, and she had already gone up to bed. And as I walked into the room, I found her light on, completely asleep, book on her face. And it was, a book about, our kids, or parenting, or being, I think it was like the dysregulated child or something like that. Anyway, So she has a stack of books on her nightstand, and all of them are just, that kind of stuff. It's some about business, because she's does that for a living, and there's all about sort of like being a better manager or whatever it is, and then parenting books and stuff like that. And so that's all that she's reading now. Whereas the old husband, the old dad over here, I'm like, wee, fantasy fun. So maybe I I don't know what that says about the dynamic that we have. I think it says a lot. Anyway, to answer your question, I used to try to have like a fiction book and a nonfiction book at the same time. And it's not that I have not read self-helpy kind of things. I definitely have. I went through, I think, a lot of us in college went through a Deepak Chopra phase, if you were around in the early 2000s, people of a certain age,
I was not in that age.
Yeah, no, you're younger than I am. And I have done that. That's not what I gravitate toward. It's not what I want to spend my time on necessarily. It's not that I don't want to better myself. It's that usually if I want to read a nonfiction book, I want to read like a biography or some historical recounting thing. I read the Lincoln book, or I like learning about things. It's not that I don't want to better myself, but sometimes those self-help books, to be frank, feel really padded.
Yeah.
Like they'll have one basic idea that the title and subtitle convey,
Yes.
And then there's like 200 pages of stories about it. It's like, here, let me tell you a story about this woman I met who tried to use my principles. And it's like, well, no, I get it. You don't need to pad it.
That is exactly it. So I haven't done like a lot of this. I feel like most of like the self-helpy things that I've sort of read come to me in the form of articles I Googled. I rarely like gravitate towards like getting a self-help kind of book.
Yeah.
With this leadership book club thing that I'm doing with work, we've read a couple now. I mentioned last week How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is,
by the way, how many friends have you won and influenced?
We're here today, Jeff. You tell me.
Fair
At
enough.
least one.
Thank you, friend. What would you like me to do next?
How to Win Friends and Influence People. I could talk very specifically about that book. The title is so great because it makes people who have that attitude of being like, I want to win people, I want to influence, gravitate towards the book. And then they read the book and it's like, have you tried being nice? I think I mentioned that. It's like the title itself is like a fake out targeting the people who would most get used from the book. So
the people who've been spending their time reading The Fountainhead.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Yes, exactly. But like the other books we've read, they feel so smarmy to me. They're like, this leader used what I told them to do.
Yeah.
And it's like name drop, quote from this person. One time, whenever Lincoln was alive, Lincoln said, I'm Canadian. I'm not a bad historian. So I don't need to know when Lincoln was alive. When Lincoln was alive, Lincoln said, quote, something quotable. And like, it's so like the grossest. I can't stand it. It makes my skin crawl. And I'm like, I hope people read these things and get something from it. And they're better people. They're better leaders, like whatever it is. But I hate them. I've read one self-help book that I really like, but not because it was necessarily helpful to me. And it's because it was written by my dad.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So not all self-help books are bad.
Exactly.
Just the ones not written by your family members.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
No, I agree. I think there's some wisdom to be gained from that. And I certainly don't want to throw, make a paint with a broad brush and throw baby out with the bathwater or any idiom you'd like. But I tend to find that they feel a little overwritten and redundant, and just sort of like there's one central idea. Like I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. You ever heard of that book? Where it's like these two mindsets, like I was raised with a dad who told me how to have a rich person's mindset, and a lot of the financial have wealth books are so off-putting to me. Just the notion of them. Anyway, I don't want to cast aspersions because I'm sure that people have gained a lot of positive things from some of these books, but they just tend not to be what draw me to reading.
Yeah.
But I also think there's plenty of people, like perhaps your friend, I don't know, but I would assume that people that only that describe themselves as only reading those kinds of books would think that spending time reading fantasy and science fiction is frivolous.
Yes.
It's like, what are you going to get out of that? Like, what is it? It's just, nonsense.
Have the opposite and equal critique
Yeah.
for the books that I choose to read. And
Right.
In my distaste for the ones that I happen to have read, I really want to emphasize, that's great. I mean, I also read ones I really like. How to Win Friends, great. I don't want to make it seem like I'm judging anybody for reading them.
Yeah, me neither. And all reading is we're here to promote that. And I like reading a lot of nonfiction. It's just that, the stuff about and like you said, I tend to enjoy reading short form versions of that because I think you can get across those good takeaways and those actionable things in your life in a shorter form. Usually those books, they just feel like, okay, I got it. You're just reiterating the same very brief set of principles over and over again, and you're trying to get it out to a 200-page novel or not novel.
I almost feel like I wonder if there's a strategy behind writing it where they're like, you have to write 50 different anecdotes, and each one is targeting a different person who might not catch it the first 49 times.
Yeah.
And it's only the 50th one where they can be like, this one has the closest Venn diagram with the actual circumstance I'm facing in my life, that they'll be like, oh, you just do these 5 things.
Right.
Even though there are some people who read it and be like, here are the 5 things. And you'd be like, great tips. And they can just go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like bullet points would be nice. Yeah. It's, they do feel very formulaic too. It's like there's a way to do them and they all sort of conform. I shouldn't say all, but the ones that I have experienced. Anyway, as we said, we like talking a little bit about stuff that you don't have to have read the book we're reading to enjoy at the beginning of each episode. So if you have things you'd like to hear us discuss, ideas, concepts, topics, ways to better ourselves, anything, post it in our Discord, and we'd love to bring it up on the show. All right, let's dig in. I'm really excited to talk about Deadhouse Gates. So let's dig in to chapters 4 and 5. Spoilers starting now. The end of the first book of Deadhouse Gates, chapters 4 and 5. And right away, chapter 4, I was riveted by the first sequence, a couple sequences in chapter 4. We're back with Fellison, and things are really bad.
So grim. So sad, so gut-wrenching. The number of times that Erikson has just been like, and remember, she's 15. It's like,
I know.
My stomach. I was these 2 chapters, going into this, I'm like, ooh, I wonder if I'm going to like it as much as I like the first one. Just finishing this first book, I'm like, I already like this book better than the first one. I'm really
better than Gardens of the Moon, you mean? Yeah.
Better than Gardens of the Moon.
Yeah. I agree.
I feel like there is, maybe it's just because I guess I'm not more familiar with like Fellison and folks, but I feel like I'm more familiar with them versus how I felt. I was like interested in Tattersale and interested in the characters in the first one because I'm like, I want to know more, but I already feel like I know Fellison. Maybe it's because like she's a young girl and I was once a young girl and scary things can happen to young girls. And so it's just, it's like, it's so dark. It's so resonant. These relationships she's building. I don't know if you want to dive into like the summary of where she is, but she's
yeah. I mean, we can. Yeah, go ahead.
She's in that the Otatarol mining camp, and she's been sort of. You should because you'll have the names. I'm so bad at it.
Yeah, I can. She is Heberick, the historian with no hands, and Bowden are the guys that she sort of met up on the trail into they survived together, being brought into this sort of slave camp, and she has shacked up with Benneth, who is running, sort of helping to run the slave camp, and has been using her body as a way to sort of barter for better treatment for herself and the other two of her companions. And at this point, she has completely become addicted to opiates. This fantasy opiate called Durhang, Durhog, excuse me, or no, Durhang. I think
Durhang,
right. Yeah. And I think Erikson just describes her situation so beautifully. I mean, it's disturbing, but but like the way her desperation and her willingness and her sort of like lack of self-preservation at this point. I mean, she is doing self-preservation, but almost like lack of self-consideration. She's just lost all hope. She's just kind of surviving from day to day and doing whatever it takes to not be in the worst situation.
Or even trying to convince herself that she's like happy with this life.
Yeah.
Like there are there's like a bitter, like such a bitterness being like, I'm doing what I have to do. I'm making their lives better, Heberick and Bowden's lives better. But like almost like out of spite, because she still feels like they're conspiring against her in some way. So she's like got teeth for them, but she's taking care of them. And she's like, I'm gonna move in with Benneth because I'm just gonna seal the deal on these choices that I've made, because it gives the air of like, I'm an adult. I actually know what I'm doing. And it's the best possible thing. I'm making the choices I want to.
Yeah.
When it's like you're making the only choices she feels like she really can to not be in greater suffering than she is.
This is going to be a very silly comparison to make, I think. But I was reminded, I saw a movie at a very specific age, and it sort of conveyed this. And you're going to laugh at what movie I say it is. It's Forrest Gump. There was at a certain age, I watched Forrest Gump, and I loved that movie when I was young. And Jenny, the character of Jenny that Robin Wright Penn so brilliantly portrayed in that movie, kind of goes through this sequence where she is, kind of hitting rock bottom and having a lot of substance abuse problems and kind of shacking up with people. And you see it sort of in a almost in a montage, and she almost kills herself. She almost like jumps off the balcony of it. Anyway, it reminded me of that, in that it so kind of beautifully shows the fog that Fellison is in, of sort of incapable. And because we're in her POV, right, she's incapable of even assessing the situation correctly, right?
Yeah.
She's having a hard time even following threads of conversation, and she'll hear something that she knows is important, and she'll try to fight through the fog of the opiate and try to latch on to something that there's a part of her brain goes, I know this is important, but she can't. And I just thought how that is written and how that is conveyed in these early sections of chapter 4 it was so compelling to me. I was riveted by that section.
Yeah. And like, so like the sadness behind it, because like you can feel the fog, but much like sort of everybody surrounding her who are not addicted to these opiates, or maybe they are, but they are portrayed as sober, and that she's sort of being continually like kept in this fog of the drug she's using and being physically used by the people around her, that you feel like you're one of the other aware people that's looking at this sad girl.
Yeah.
And in that moment, so the moment where she like tries to register something, Benneth comes and takes her as like a poker chip to try to trade something for something with the person who's actually running the slave camp.
Captain Sawark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she like, because she's in this fog, she hears something and she speaks to it. And I think it's about Bowden.
Well, yeah. So here's what I got from that sequence. So yeah, it's really disturbing that at this point, even Bennett like doesn't care for her. Is just like giving
a
her to
toy.
his friends and other people. It's just so despicable. And brings her as an offering to his superior, the guy who's really running the mine. And this guy clocks something about Fellison. I think he realizes that she's
like Paran.
Well, yeah, that she's like the sister of what's her name? The
new adjunct.
Right. I think he clocks, or he gets a sense of that. He like puts two and two together and is like her age when she arrived at the camp. Like, I think he like puts that together. He doesn't say it explicitly, but he gets freaked out, which freaks Bennett out because he doesn't know what's going on. But Bennett thinks it's about. I don't understand what the connection of Bowden is, because clearly Bowden tried to escape.
Yeah.
And that's bad because he was his employer and he sort of, or his underling, and he was sort of responsible for that. But I think this might be one of those scenarios where Bennett is like coming to the wrong conclusions,
Yeah. Because afterwards he like drags her out of that place, and in the street he's like, what do you know about Bowden? And she's like, what? And then he's like, what's your name? And she's like, what? And then he beats the crap out of her.
It's so interesting that she instinctively knows that it's worse for her if she's somebody important.
Yeah.
And she's just trying to say, I'm nobody. And he's like asking her about, name the city that you're from and what, it's so disturbing. And she gets like her willingness to stay in the situation she is, and just wanting. What's so heartbreaking too at the end of all that sequence is when she tells Heberek, who's like nursing her back to health, tell him I'm sorry. It's so heartbreaking. It's like, ugh.
Yeah, it's like so perfect for like she's like, tell him I'm sorry, tell him to take me back. And literally like her mouth is like basically sealed shut because of all the cuts and the dried blood around her. And he puts oil on, just being like, we need to get water in your body. Like, you're like malnourished even more than you ever would be normally. And basically like helps unseal her lips so she could speak. And she's basically like, you're not my real dad. Like, like immediately, like teen angst, just thinking about the guy who's terrible for me. And Heberek's like, oh my God. She's like, you don't know me. Or she's like, I don't even know. Or who's, I forget which one of them says, you don't know me at all. And Heberek's like, yeah, I know.
The image of him with no hands, like applying, and she's all beat up. It's just so dark. But so evocative. And I can't help but hope/assume, but also hope that where we're going, we're getting Fellison to complete rock bottom so that when she finally ascends and we stay with her. I mean, I don't have any confidence based on what's happened in the first novel and so far in this one that any kind of traditional arc is going to happen with her. But I'm hoping that we will see her finally, get back on her feet, escape, get independent, be powerful.
This is the juxtaposition for the future triumph that she has.
Yes. That's what I'm hoping happens, because I feel like, but who knows? Erikson, oftentimes subverts expectations, or does the thing so quickly that you're like, what? What?
Oh my God, there's a huge one in the next chapter where so the number of times that in the first book and this one, I'm like reading and I'm reading words. I'm like, that is an interesting revelation, and then like the next person reaction was like, I've never been so scared in my life, or what, like something, and I'm like, wait, what happened? Or like go back just a couple of paragraphs and be like, oh, this is just a really intense thing that happened. And just like you would realize something and your mood would shift instantly, that's how quickly it happens in the book, and people are reacting to it. It feels like you're experiencing it in real time, and the chaos that would feel like internal, like storming of the feelings that emerge from this, where you're like, what's wrong? What? Versus like a book where you'd be like, walk you through it like.
And you're so right. These two chapters that we're covering today, are full of moments that are just like out of nowhere. What? I feel like we were leading to something really, and then what? It's very exciting to read that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So after we are, out of Fellison's super dark
Nightmare.
place, which, oh, by the way, the last sentence of that, which I think is the very last moment of it is the most heartbreaking, where Hebrik is like, yeah, I hope he takes you back, or like I try not I'll try not to mess this up so that he will. Like Hebrik has just given up. He's just like, yeah, go back to him, I guess. It's just it's so sad.
Yeah. Brittle.
So I hope that doesn't happen, but I don't have any confidence it won't. Next we're with Callum, heading into this guardhouse, and I loved all of this. Callum being an uber badass, going into this scene with all these soldiers who are like, who are you? And he's like, hey, you, come here to the back room. He's like, check it out, Clawmaster. And I was like, oh, snap. He's totally, I love that in a world of magic, real usable magic, he's still like calling out the phonies. He's like, oh, you're going to do a reading with me? Phony. I thought that was cool.
And like how aggro he was about it is so funny to me.
Yeah.
She pulls the card, and it's not like he said it in like a quippy way. He's like, let me tell you all the reasons that's stupid.
Yeah. Oh, that's my future? Idiot. Yeah. I loved it. And then all of that funny stuff, and he's like, I'll be on my way. And then Lestari Yill and the Red Blades come in and just murder everyone.
Yeah. I also love, so Callum's being a badass. He's walking through the desert. He's seeing like these terrible buggies that are gonna like give you horrible welts if you get caught in this storm.
Yeah.
And then it's like, ooh. And immediately I'm like, oh, we're going to see somebody eaten by those buggies at some point. That's for sure. And immediately like those two, who we will find out are like these assassins who've been tailing him, show up, and he's like, they're covered in welts, like clearly so mad. And everybody's like, oh man, you brought the flies in here. Oh, come on, man. It was like, oh, immediate gratification for Callum just being better than everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so awesome. And I love how we find out that they're standing outside, and she's like, did you murder everyone in there? It's like, oh yeah, I totally murdered everyone in there. Okay, cool. Okay. Like we can
sure
go
did
now.
you double check? We really want to make sure we're not leaving
no one's alive, right?
on. Yeah.
Everyone's murdered. Yeah. And then we get some of our fun duo Mappo and Ikariam in Pust's temple. And these guys, I love these is kind of like comedic relief, but also serious at the same time. But and Pust is a goofball. I don't know what his deal is yet, because I feel like the goofballiness of Pust is a mask in some ways,
or like, so one of the things that I kept thinking about, how much he's like, kill any spiders you see. I'm like, spiders are divers, right?
Yeah.
Gotta be.
Yeah, because what happens is Mappo and Ikariam are looking for the gate that is on the path of the hand that will allow Soul Taken and divers to ascend, I think. And they think they find it, right? They find weird stuff, like a weird crypt where the nuns used to put things, but then the two stones don't make any sense, and the kind of like how they've dug it up doesn't make any sense. And they find, like drawings of beasts and stuff, and they think they find it. They're like, we got it. And they go to Pust and they're like, hey, Pust, we got it. And he's like, idiots. You didn't find it. We've been looking at this. We're looking at this forever. You didn't find it.
You think I didn't know that was down there?
Yeah.
I knew that was down there.
Yeah. So I don't know what that is. And then he's like, well, if you really want to find it, the first thing you need is an epic quest to find my broom.
Yes.
And I'm like, I love it. It felt so much like a video game, like a like Secret of Monkey Island or something, a comedic video game where they're like, you must find the broom.
Yeah.
And,
I feel like, especially after like the fellas and stuff, it's like very much a breath of fresh air anytime we're hanging out with these two.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of letting myself like float along blissfully, waiting for like a
The
big
turn.
spike in the energy.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, they got to find a broom. What's next? And I kind of just let myself mentally relax through those chapters.
Yeah. Well, I like the dynamic between Mappo and Akariam. Like Mappo is a little freaked out that of Akariam's behavior, and that, you know, Pust is like, find my broom. And Mappo's like, this guy broom. And Akariam's like, yeah, we'll totally do it. He's like, what? We are? So yeah, I agree with you. We're building to something there. And then we get some Duker Culp Sormo action in the middle of the desert. Sormo wants to do this ritual in the middle of the desert, and it goes real bad. Lots of divers show up and attack them, ants and bugs and all kinds of stuff. And then Big Demon kind of comes out and saves them to a certain extent. Kind of is the target for all the divers to attack, and then Culp just punches Sormo in the face.
That's one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is suddenly very intense.
Yeah.
Like we're going to do a ritual. What are we going to do? We'll see. Sormo wants to do his thing.
Yeah.
And Sormo does it. One of them gets like, it's in my brain. It's like a ritual where they like the kind of thing you'd see in like a detective book. That's like, I can see what happened here. And there'd be like a detective show or something. And like, I can see what happened here. And then be like showing the replay sort of around them like a ghost. And then it's like, no, whatever the ritual is, these things are here. These buggies bit the hell out of this guy. And now he's like, is he poisoned? They're like, it's kind of, I forget what it says in the book, but it's like, it's not quite poison. It's like a spirit. Like he's been sort of like stung with like possessions or something. I can't quite remember the nuance of it, but like, oh man, this is brutal. It's like there's suddenly in immediate danger from vicious animal battles happening around them, and then they just so happen to get out because they're like, how do we knock this kid out of this? And they're like, we just hit him, just clock him. Like that kid, aka the most powerful warlock that's ever existed, apparently he's really gonna be mad when he wakes up.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was cool was, you know, you think of divers as they're the shapeshifters that don't just shapeshift into one thing, they shapeshift into groups of things, which is already a cool concept. But we'd only ever seen sort of, you know, jackals and wolves and sort of, you know, pack animals, which is what you assume a shapeshifter would shape into is, you know, traditionally is like animals. But I love the idea of, no, bees and wasps and ants and just like thousands of things, not just like 6 wolves or whatever.
Yeah.
It's thousands of insects is what I'm shape-shifting into. Like that is cool. Just that concept alone I thought was pretty neat. And then, yeah, the way they're overwhelmed immediately. The thing that I think is significant about that scene that I don't know what it means yet is, you know, Sormo's like, hey, the whole reason they were here is because either they just thought this warren was empty and they were cruising through an empty warren, and we just happened to like, oops, we opened the same door to the place they were using as a passageway because they thought it was empty. Or B, they are associated with the Shadow Warren in some way as well. So there's something about that, and we'll get to it soon.
Yeah.
But recontextualizing all the Shadow Warren and Shadow Throne and all that stuff. Yeah. So there's something big there, I think. But that's kind of how chapter 4 ends, is that scene. And then chapter 5 is awesome. I'm just going to say it.
So good.
There's lots of Fiddler, Crocus, Apsalar stuff, and all of it is awesome, in my opinion.
Amazing.
Yeah. The fact, so they're trying to get into this city that is surrounded by a rebel army. They didn't know the rebel army was there. They were kind of hidden by the mountainside. And so they show up in the city like, oh no, we're going to get apprehended. We got to, pretend to be these disguises of these newlyweds and this Graal guy who is taking them on a pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
I love every time Fiddler pretends to be a Graal.
It's so good.
Just that he's this ornery, insult-throwing dude is a blast. Like, he does it so well.
And everybody's like, nice. That's a Graal, all right. Like, that's like what seals the deal for everybody is like the more aggro he is with like a wink. Like those people show up. Well, like another moment, like very intense where it's like there's a lot of chaos going on. They show up. People are like, city's closed. And he's like, what do you mean the city's closed? And the guy's like, said city's closed.
Yeah.
And then immediately his horse, which is actually a Graal horse, which apparently is like a special smart beast, bites this guy in the face and rips his face off. And then like the other like local tribes people come out and they're like, that's a sick ass horse, and like I will pay you so much for this horse, and everybody's like, the horse, and he's like, you are not fit to even smell my horse's farts. But then he like throws like his beer at them and like gives them a wink, and they're all like, nice, we're buddies now. And it was like so quickly between like asshole guard, violent face ripping off, and them being like, that's so horrifying, and Fiddler having to like mask his absolute horror that the horse has done this, and the vision of this dude's face ripping off by just like yelling as many insults at him as he can imagine. It's like so funny and like interesting culturally to see people like, that's a good ass horse.
That's what one of the things I love about Erikson's writing is the setup here, and this is exactly what we were talking about earlier about subverting expectations. The setup here is, oh no, they're going to be onto us. They're going to find out our disguises. They're going to be onto us. And the first thing that happens is his horse bites the dude's face off. And you go, well, that's probably the worst thing that could have happened right here. They're screwed now. And what actually happens is everybody's like, yeah, dude, you got the best horse ever. It's like the coolest thing that could have happened. And it's so perfect in that moment of subverting your expectation. And, you know, people are like, I'll give you $10 for your horse, $20 for your horse. I want a horse that bites people's faces off. And one guy's like, I'll give you $3 for the horse's hairs.
Yes.
Like, what are you going to do with that, dude?
And then even if it felt like because he's like, oh, I passed around the beer and it seemed like a charming thing. And he was like, you can feel the heat of my horse with your hand for a sliver, but only once.
It's the coolest
any more
scene.
than that. But then later they're like at the camp with these folks. And it mentions that people in the background are putting their hand on the horse. People are coming up and touching the horse, being like, "That's a good horse.
That is the coolest horse. You have the coolest horse, dude." And he like bought the horse from some dude for nothing,
like,
you know.
Who was like, he said it like a Graal who was like drunk in a tavern. He's like, "Can I have that?"
Yeah.
Nice.
I love how Crocus is like, I'm never gonna unsee that horse biting that dude's face off. I'm never gonna. I'll close my eyes and I'll always see that. He's just like shook from the horse. So good. And yes, I will say, you know how we always pick our favorite sentence. I almost picked, "None of you are worthy to smell my horse's farts." Like that's
my favorite sentence is on that page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like every time he pretends to be a Graal and comes up with new insults for people, and people are like, "Oh, dude, yeah, no, you're definitely a Graal because of how insulted I am right now." It's awesome. But things get even crazier because they just book it into the city after that, and then they find another girl who is being, you know, completely abused and chased by 6 guys.
Before they book it into the city, there's like some more interesting cultural things that happen, and like, the things that you thought were going to be this big obstacle, like, ooh, they're going to get got, didn't. Yeah. And then they get to this camp, and I can't remember the name of sort of like the other
Iraq
people are there, like welcoming them in. There are like certain rituals. It would be so offensive if you did not spend the night with their camp. Right. But the longer you spend with them, they're going to ask you questions and figure out what Grawl are you? And even
Yeah,
as they're
right.
talking, they're saying, oh yeah, there's some Grawl like coming. They're gonna come hang with us. And
Yeah.
like,
It's gonna be awesome. Your buddies, your Grawl pals are gonna be here in just like a few minutes.
and so they're like, how do we get out of this? And Fiddler says, oh, I'm actually outcast. Thinking they'd be like, oh, we get it. You're outcast.
Yeah.
They're like, you're an outcast, bro? You can get out of here. We won't murder you, but we will tell them and they will come for you.
Yeah. And I'm gonna get your horse.
And I'm gonna get your horse. It's like immediately they're like, dude, outcast, no good. You gotta die.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the vibe, and Absolar throws like a tantrum, like, where? I need a pony, daddy. Like, take me where I want to go. Where? And then as they start riding, Fiddler's like, your little tantrum probably would have been enough. And now we have to run from the actual Grawl.
Yeah.
Who are now chasing us.
Yeah. It's something you don't see in these kinds of books very often. And I think Erikson does it a lot. And it's so cool that characters make mistakes, get it wrong. They do the wrong thing. Their cool plan was the worst thing they could have done in that moment. You know, I love that he's like, yeah, we would have been totally fine if I hadn't lied like that. I really messed up.
Yeah, that whole scene.
But yeah, it's cool. And she's like hip to the fact that if you have a wedding veil on and you lift it to curse people, they don't want that. So she's like, I'm gonna lift it. I'm gonna do it.
I'm not scared. You think I'm scared?
Yeah.
And that whole scene, I just thinking about like what you said, subverting expectations. It was like a Rube Goldberg machine, like of this hit that, hit this, and now they're on their way to the city, but they have a much bigger problem now with the Grawl army. But it's like ting, 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 and then they're on their way. It feels great. High
turning
energy.
the screws.
Yeah,
it's so good. It's so good. Upping the peril for the characters, and then we get then they just want to get through, and they see this little girl being pursued by 6 guys, and they're like, oh yeah, we're definitely murdering all those dudes.
Yeah,
and how that was described as well was so satisfying and awesome, and it just happens, and they all do it, and even Crocus is awesome, and Absolar is awesome, and everybody just understands immediately, like, oh, we're not letting these horrible 6 guys live, even if it slows us down, even if it makes our situation worse, we are definitely not letting them live. I thought that was awesome.
I loved it.
Yeah,
and even the fact that like Fiddler's like, okay, I took a couple of them down, and turns around and Absolar's like already got like her pulling her blades out of somebody.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's my kind of woman.
Yeah. Yeah. And the horse is also like, I'm stomping dudes. And
yes. Oh my God. Just like crushing their skulls, like doing a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was me. And then we have the revelation. Okay. Because so many things I want to say about this, but we'll just say it straight out. The revelation is that Shadow Throne, which right there in the title, I don't know how you don't know that right away, me. Shadow Throne is the ascendant old emperor Kalinved, and Dancer, Kalinved's right-hand man, I think. It turned ascended into Cotillion, who possessed Absolar/Sari. So even though Absolar's back to being Absolar, kind of, she still has Dancer's memories, and she's like, "Oh yeah, no, I remember being there with Lysine/Surly, and I remember this all going down because I have Dancer's memories." And Fiddler's like, that means Dancer's is Cotillion, and that they ascended. Oh, that's why the Shadow Throne is a new house of new Warrens. And why didn't I put this together?
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what your reaction to that was, because that felt like we are really early in this book. This is a major bombshell. Recontextualize. This is one of the things that I kept hearing about Gardens of the Moon is people like, oh man, rereading Gardens of the Moon after you've read the series is huge. And
yeah.
Already I'm like, oh, I feel like I could reread all those scenes with Cotillion and Sari and all of that stuff and see it in a completely different light. If it's like, oh, that's the old Emperor Kalinved, the scene with Animander Rake and Shadow Throne like talking to each other. It's like it's a completely different context now.
Yeah, well, I think maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought like in the first book, would they be like, "Oh, the Emperor's dead," and somebody would be like, "Supposedly dead." Like I remember something like that where they're saying, "Well, he's not dead, but he's
we never
been
found
missing."
his body.
Yeah, he's been missing for however long.
Yeah.
So reading that and being like, "Oh, he escaped by ascending," and it's just so interesting, like reading that section because it really is like Fiddler like walking through it, and Absalar is kind of like, and he waits till he says everything, and she's like, "That's correct." And he's like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah.
So the thing that really struck me is like very interesting, especially because it came up a couple times in this chapter, is I'm like, the deck of dragons just changes. And so they're like, the deck of dragons hits Callum in the chest from that fraud woman, and then it gives a real reading out. So we got deck of dragons, and they're like, "Oh yeah, why didn't I think about it when we did the reading in the last book when the Shadow Throne and blah blah blah? That's why Shadow Throne came into the deck of dragons." And then later down the line, somebody was like, "I can't wait for everybody to pull their deck of dragons and be like, a new card." And like, how does this deck work, man? Pretty sick deck of cards that just has like new stuff popping into it all the time. But my reaction is then like, well, this whole time I'm like, I thought Sori, now Absalar, was like the hand of the Empress going out to like try and kill people on behalf of the Empress. But really, it's like that slow path of being like, oh, she was going to come all the way back around and then kill the Empress.
Yeah.
For like revenge of the what could have been, what should have been, would have been murder of the Emperor, who was now just in a more powerful space. Yeah. So it just very interesting. I was just like, cool. I think that was like my biggest reaction, was just being like, whoa, but not quite knowing all that it implies now for people's motivations or what is going to matter.
Yeah. Yes. I also had the whoa, mind blown, this changes everything moment, which is a cool thing to have, especially this early in the novel. Mm-hmm. I also am I marvel at how it's done, right? Because it kind of comes out of nowhere. There's no build to this revelation. It's literally like we're in this action scene that kind of doesn't have anything to do with it, and it's just sort of like, oh yeah, no, that's what I remember. And he's like, wait, that's what you were, what? She's like, it's almost anticlimactic, although it feels climactic. It is almost this like strange moment to have this giant bomb land narratively. And also it makes me go, it's so interesting how Erikson structured this story, because I had the feeling that I think was intended, which is, wow, that's amazing. This is a huge revelation. But also, if that's the revelation, doesn't it make more sense to, like, we don't know Callanved and Dancer at all. We've never seen them alive. And if to have that resonate and be like, oh, Shadow Throne is this character, it feels like I feel like most authors would have had scenes in the first novel where you're hanging out with the Emperor before, we have the moment where he's being pursued and it seems like he's dead. And, we, the reader, think he's dead. And then later you go, oh, that character that I knew and hung out with wasn't dead. They turned into this god. But all we ever hear about is Callanved secondhand from people. And we don't really have a sense of who he is and what he is, and if he was good or evil. Like, a lot of people talk about him as this very positive thing, and other people are like, no, he was brutal. And I know that that's sort of the theme of all of the Malazan books, is there's no good and evil. It's all sort of shades of gray, and I like that. But it just is a strange thing to, like, I got the intended reaction, which is like, oh my gosh, this is important. But I also feel like he doesn't do it in the way that most authors would, I think, which is, you're familiar with this character, and then the twist on the character is revealed later, and it changes. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand what you're saying. It's like I'm reading it and I'm like, my mind is blown. I'm like, there's like breaking it down. I'm like, there's not that much information that should make me care as much as I do about this moment, but I really do.
Right.
But it's also like part of the revelation is the fact that Absalar's like, well, I remember it this way. Or she says something and Fiddler's like, that's funny. I never heard that suggestion before. And she's like, well, I remember it. He's like, okay, even taking your possession into account, you were not alive then. This physical person. And the revelation that she has memories beyond Absalar's physical years. She has just Cotillion's memories. And Cotillion's memories are of this circumstance that the only people in the room were Lacine and Dancer. Like that people know of that was like who was there. And it's like, so your memories are actually dancers. And so wait. And then like him sort of putting that together is, I think the idea, like some of the bigger things to me were not even necessarily that like, ooh, whoa, the Emperor's still alive. But like Absalar's has retained Cotillion's memory beyond her own existence.
Right.
And
yes.
that is not always from a god looking down. That is from what his life was before he even ascended.
Before he was a god. Yeah. Yeah. And that he's not possessing her directly now, but it's still there.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But also then Fiddler reacts with, oh, Dancer is ascended and didn't die. Why didn't he tell us? We were his buddies. All the bridge burners were his buddies. And that's another moment where I'm like, most authors would have shown us that. We would have had the buddy Dancer with the guys sequences where they're going on adventures and the Dancer and the bridge burners are buddies. So later when he's like, why didn't Dancer tell us? We go, oh yeah, we were there. Why didn't he tell us? But he doesn't do that. We don't know anything about Dancer.
Out of nowhere, that guy's my best friend. Like,
yeah, right? It's so interesting. And it leads me to believe, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it leads me to surmise that part of what's going to be happening over the course of the next however many books is learning more about that stuff, like that backstory and finding out like who Kalinved was, who Dancer was, what their relationship was, like why they ascended, how they ascended, because everything we've heard about Shadow Throne, and maybe I have the wrong impression, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought of Shadow Throne as like the devil, as a real
like
dark force, and so that's interesting, right? This shadow influence, this shadow warren, this new house of gods is from the old emperor. It was the old emperor. So why is it so dark? Unless I think there's something there, right? So I feel like that's kind of what we're going to, over the course of our adventures in the present, we're going to learn more about that past. He's going to fill that in as we go. That's my sense of it.
Yeah. Even seeing maybe the bridge burners at like the height, because we've always seen them kind of like as these underdogs that Lacine is like, I could kill
decimated.
You.
Yeah.
And I will. But they were the people, the soldiers, the guys, and that era seems like something I hope we learn more about.
Yeah. I'm just kind of amazed by it because I think the theme of this episode is subverted expectations, and this to me was like the poster child of that, because it wasn't accomplished in the way that you would assume. It doesn't happen at a time that like there's no build to this. They just reveal it, and yet it was mind blowing. Yet it worked. Like it worked for me. And that's what I'm marveling at, that trick of it not being really set up, it not being really built to, and yet it still feels so cool and such a wow moment. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like, oh my gosh, all those scenes of Shadow Throne from the first book are just completely different now.
So what I'm hearing is we're going to go read through the whole thing, and then our next book club series is just Malazan second read.
5 years of just Malazan books in our channel. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. right. But you know what? The crazy stuff is not over. I mean, we're already hitting up against our time limit here, but the crazy stuff is not over because we have more insane, thrilling action with Callum bringing the book, doing what he said he was going to do, taking the book to Shaik. He meets up with Leoman, the captain of her bodyguards. I thought that was cool. And this Toblakai, which made me think immediately of Cobra Kai from Karate Kid. Toblakai, who is so badass that he uses a wooden sword.
Oh my gosh. A wooden sword is, it's special wood, but it's still... The description of him being like he was like almost 7 feet tall, and how many muscles he has, he still looked wide. It's like such a good, like this rectangle of a person. Yeah. I could picture that guy.
Yeah. Total. He doesn't even have a name. He's just referred to by his species, the Toblakai. And that whole sequence of like him coming to Shaik. She's like, he's like, I'm only giving the book to he's like, Leo man's like, give me the book. He's like, I'm not gonna give you the book. I'm only giving it to Shaik. And she's like, oh, you mean me right behind you? He's like, oh, yeah.
Here you go.
Yeah. Here you go. Here's the book. And she's like, okay, cool. Well, we're finally going to do it. We're going to unleash the whirlwind. The apocalypse is upon us. I've seen this moment 1,000 times. I've only ever seen this moment. I know my purpose in it's, again, subverted expectations because we're building to this cool thing. She's like, I have seen this. I know exactly what's going to happen right now. And then bolt from across the
skull explodes. That whole fight, that whole scene. This is like, it's the last chapter in the book. It's so like action, but also hilarious to me. She like goes in the ritual. She has to open the page to the sky at the dawn, and then she's like, I will be renewed, and the whirlwind will begin. And she like opens the book, and she's like, and then the bolt goes through her eye. Then there's this brawl between the Toblakai, who like annihilates people, just absolutely crushes bones with his wooden sword.
Yeah.
I don't think he's actually slicing through people. He just hits them hard enough that like a ripple of shattering bone.
All the red blades are Lestaria yell, and the red blades are like, oh yeah, we got the jump on them. They're ours now. And the Toblakai like, retreat.
Get out. What are you stupid? That guy's 7 feet tall and wide. Get out of there. And then I love that they leave. They get around the corner. The main sort of huntress of those red blades, she's like unconscious. She is one of the people who dragged her out. And then they get around the corner and they're like, nice. They kind of fist bump each other like, job well done. And it sort of cuts back to the Toblakai and crew with like their Shaik bleeding out in the sand. And they're like, what do we do? And they're like, well, she opened the book and it was dawn. Yeah. And the other guy's like, she did say she'd be renewed. And they're like, I guess we'll just wait. And that's like the end of the book. And then the next chapter's whirlwind. I'm like, I guess it worked.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait to read. I forced myself to stop, and I was like, I can't wait to see what happens, because it's, again, that's what's so awesome about the storytelling in these two novels so far that we've been reading is nothing plays out like you think it's going to. It's so cool that he manages to do that over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. It's so thrilling to read that, and it feels like. What they talk about with, things need to feel surprising but inevitable. And I think he nails that so frequently of the thing that, that of course that happened, but also I never saw that. I didn't expect that at all. Mm-hmm. And that fight was amazing. The way it's described, it was so thrilling, and the push and pull of it, where you think one side, obviously they kill Shaik. That was what their goal was. And you think they're just going to completely overwhelm them. They have numbers, it's 2 against however many. Yeah. And yet the 2 are so incredibly badass. They failed their one job. They had one job, and that is to bodyguard Shaik. Failed that. But but then they're like, okay, well, we'll just murder all of you. And And they have to retreat. Like the push and pull of that is really exciting. These last 2 chapters, I think, are my favorite 2 chapters that I've read yet. Even in Gardens of the Moon and this one. Like, if this is our new baseline, if this is our this is like the first section of this book, this novel. It's amazing. Yeah.
Very fun.
Very fun. So obviously you said the next section is called Whirlwind. So we think the whirlwind is happening, right?
Or it's going to be like Whirlwind. You open it up and it's like, and the whirlwind never happened.
Yeah.
Next.
Any predictions or expectations or hopes?
Probably all of my hopes lie around Felison sort of getting herself together. I think that's what I'm thinking about. Like, what I'm predicting for the future is wanting to see her start climbing out of that bottom of that rock bottom.
That pit. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, there's that, we know that Duker and Culp are trying to break Heberick out, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it feels to me like that guard that keeps, the guard's like, hey, did you do the thing I asked? And she's like, I'm too wasted to help. I feel like that's their inside man.
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah. And so I feel like there's going to be a breakout, but it's one of those things of like, oh, Felison, just wake up. Somebody's trying to help you and you're not helping. So it's going to be interesting to see if we get a prison break coming. I hope so. I love prison breaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to see how this whirlwind, maybe the whirlwind can help the prison break. I don't know how widespread it's going to be,
Like the first book, I assume that all of these threads tie together.
Yeah.
But I think like the whirlwind is like the event, I don't yet see. I felt like earlier in the book, I could see where they're all going to meet up. Okay. They're meeting where the tyrant was buried,
right,
entombed outside of Darujistan. I can see that, and then it's like the building towards it that's like, ooh, they're gonna something's gonna happen. And right now, I'm like, lots of interesting things are gonna happen. I'm like, how do we get Akarium and Mappo?
Yeah,
all the way over to these people. Is it all going to be at the gate? Is that going to be like the meeting spot of all the fates?
Yeah.
So
I don't know what to expect about this whole Path of the Hand and where all the Soul Taken and Divers are going. Like, what is that about? That feels, I don't understand the stakes of that yet exactly. And I think it's going to be a big deal. Clearly it is, but it hasn't come into focus yet. And I think I'm excited to see what that's exactly about.
Yeah.
So, man. Yeah. Okay. So let's do our favorite sentence of this section, as we always do.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's yours? You start.
Okay. I'll do mine. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. Like I said, I almost went with not one of you is fit to smell my horse's farts. Pretty darn good sentence. But what I really went with, this is an italicized sentence that Fiddler is thinking to himself. And he says, "Don't fall in love with this woman, Fid, old friend, else you loosen your guard of the lad's life and call it an accident of fate."
Yeah.
I love that sentence because he's admitting to himself that she's so awesome that he might get some feelings, but also this notion of Crocus and Absalar have a thing. If I start having a thing, this bad things might happen to the kid, and I just might be like, "Oops, sorry."
Yeah.
Accident
or even
of fate.
Even if I decide that I want to start having a thing, maybe something happens to Crocus.
Yeah. And
that's by accident.
The self-awareness of going, I will lie to myself and call it an accident of fate. Call it like, hey, there's nothing I could do.
Yeah.
I love it. Such a well phrased. It speaks so much to his state of mind. I love it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I mentioned mine is sort of in the same. I went between a couple. I either was going to go with the whole stream of Grawl curses that Fiddler just unleashes to like cover the fact that he's like, oh my god, my horse bit that guy's face off. Um, but instead, I think the sentence that really got me was, "It would later be said that even a Grawl's horse knew an insult when it saw one."
Yeah, even the horse was like insulted that you spit on the ground.
Which I love, because even as I was reading, like leading up to that, and that guy's like, "City's closed." I was like, I actually was like, "You want to be spitting at that smart ass horse?" And then immediately the horse was like, "No," and like the chaos ensued, and I was like, "Yeah, get him!" It was like just, it like gave me exactly what I wanted from that moment, and I just loved it.
The best thing about that, I also loved that sentence. The best thing about that is, it would later be said.
Yeah.
I love that, because you don't know what's going to happen yet, but you know that people are going to be talking about this. What you're about to read, people are going to be talking about later. You know,
I'm like, that's like the Iraq people. That's the rumor that immediately began. It would later be said, where did it start? The Iraq folks who were like, "Oh, that sick ass horse, man. It knew an insult. Okay, it knew an insult." And everybody's like, "Oh, interesting." And
let me tell you the story about this horse that bit this dude's face off.
Yeah.
I tried to buy it. I wanted it. I wanted to show it to you. But
I tried to give my daughter. He wasn't having it. He wasn't having it.
Amazing. All right. Well, there you go. We have completed the first book of the second novel, and we are on to Whirlwind. So I think we're going to do 3 chapters for the next episode. Mm-hmm. So if you're reading along with us, 3 chapters is what we're doing before next week. Excited to talk about that. But in the meantime, we have some other books to recommend to you. Lana, do you have a recommendation for folks?
I do. This book was like put back in my memory from talking about it with my sister. It is Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. I believe it is a series of 3, but I forget the names of the other 2 books right now. But it is kind of like a post-apocalyptic sort of, I don't know if I'd call it sci-fi, but like I remember like there being like science fiction-y elements to it, in this interesting post-apocalyptic world, and just relationships, like many books. The thing that really sticks in my head is like a post-apocalyptic world. There's not really food. That they have like these process machines that make like fake chicken called chicky knobs. And chicky knobs really sticks in my head. It's a great book, very entertaining. I loved all 3 of them. Oryx and Crake, Margaret Atwood, chicky knobs.
That's what I call when I make chicken nuggets for my kids. I call them chicky nugs.
Yeah.
Maybe
big Atwood head over
big
here.
Atwood head over here. I'm also going to stay in the realm of science fiction. I'm going to mention a book I read pretty recently, actually, that I enjoyed. It is Andy Weir's latest novel. It's called Project Hail Mary, and I really enjoyed The Martian. I thought it was a great read, and of course the movie's so good too. And I know that Project Hail Mary is going to be a book. They just announced that Lord and Miller are doing the movie. Did I say? Anyway, yeah, they're doing the movie. So they just announced that they're going to direct it, not just produce it. So that should be exciting. So read the book before you see the movie. I thought the novel of The Martian was so much fun. And obviously the movie's great too, but the book is so much better. You know, I'm that guy. And I think Project Hail Mary is a lot of fun too. I don't think it hits the heights for me of The Martian, but it is very similar thematically in that it is one guy in space trying to survive, but it has a hook that I don't want to spoil. My advice is don't read anything about it if you're interested in a fun science fiction story. Just read the book without knowing anything going in, because there's sort of basically the premise is a spoiler. I loved not knowing what happens, but it is it is something that you've seen done a lot, but I've never seen it done like this. And while I have some qualms about the book, there are some sequences that I think are not very well written, and it is it slows down in certain sections. Overall, I think it's a really fun read. It's a quick read, at least it was for me, and it's a cool science fiction premise. So I recommend Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Book Club. Thanks for being with us. Again, you can check out the Discord and hang out with folks that are also reading along with us and comment on other books you're reading, whatever you like, at 5x5 DLC on the Discord. We'll see you next week. Until then, keep reading!
When the world's too dark of a place to be, and you need an escape from reality, open up those pages, it's sci-fi or fantasy, whatever genre you please. And join a book club, 'cause you won't read it on your own. Join a book club, so you'll be held accountable. It's just a means to an end, but you're doing it with your friends, so join the book club.